The night I realized the footsteps outside were copying the sound of my breathing, I understood, too late, that whatever was out there had already been listening to me for a very long time. At first, I thought it was just the cold playing tricks on the cabin. Winter does that. It convinces you that silence is normal, that strange sounds are just what's shrinking. Snow settling, wind changing direction. That's what I told myself as I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, counting my breaths to calm my racing heart. In, out, in, out. Then the sound came again. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Each step landed a second after I exhaled. I stopped breathing. So did it. That was when fear crawled up my spine, slow and deliberate, like something with plenty of time. My chest burned as I held my breath, ears straining, mind screaming at me not to move. Seconds stretched into something thicker, heavier, until my lungs forced air out in a shaky gasp. Crunch. Right on cue. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. Whoever or whatever was outside wasn't just walking around my cabin. It was testing me, studying my rhythm, learning how I sounded when I thought no one was listening. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't sit up. I didn't even blink. Every instinct told me that movement would confirm something I wasn't ready to accept yet. That this wasn't an animal, and it wasn't lost. It was intentional. The cabin was deep in winter country, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by forest thick enough to swallow sound. Snow had been falling for hours, erasing tracks almost as soon as they formed. If someone was out there, they had no reason to be. And if they weren't someone, then I didn't want to know what they were. Another breath escaped me. Crunch. Closer. I could feel it now, not as a sound but as pressure. Like the air itself was leaning inward, pushing against the walls. The heater clicked softly, then went quiet. The house settled into a silence so complete it rang in my ears. I remember thinking one single thought, clear and sharp. This already started before I noticed it. Because how long had those footsteps been there? How long had they been matching my breathing before I became aware of them? Minutes? Longer? The idea made my skin prickle with a deep instinctive dread. The kind humans are born with, the kind that kept our ancestors alive. The footsteps shifted direction. No longer pacing. Circling. Slowly. Patiently. I could tell where they were without looking. Snow carries sound differently at night, especially in the cold. Each step carved a mental map around the cabin, tracing the walls, stopping beneath windows, lingering near the door. Listening. I finally turned my head toward the clock on the nightstand. The red numbers glowed faintly in the dark. 2:14 a.m. I had gone to bed just after 11. That meant I had been asleep when it arrived. That meant I had no idea what woke me up or why. A soft sound brushed the side of the cabin then. Not a knock. Not a scratch. A tap. Gentle. Curious. Like a fingertip testing glass. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart pounding so hard it felt visible, and in that moment I knew something with absolute certainty. Whatever was outside didn't want to break in. It wanted me to notice it. And the worst part? It was waiting for me to respond. Before that night, my life was simple, quiet in a way that felt earned. I'm not someone who craves excitement or chaos. I work a remote tech job that mostly involves staring at code, answering emails, and attending meetings where everyone pretends not to be tired. When winter rolled around, I decided to take advantage of that flexibility and spend a few weeks somewhere isolated, somewhere calm. That's how I ended up at the cabin. It sat alone at the edge of a snow-covered forest, several miles outside a small mountain town most people only stopped in for gas. The owner called it peaceful. And it was. The kind of place where your phone barely worked, where nights were dark enough to remind you how bright the stars used to be. I arrived in early January right after the holidays, when life felt slower and expectations were low. The drive up had been uneventful. Plowed roads, tall pines dusted with snow, radio crackling in and out. By the time I unlocked the cabin door, the sun was already dipping low, painting the snow orange and pink. Inside, everything smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. The cabin wasn't big. Just one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living room with a stone fireplace, but it felt solid. Safe. Thick wooden walls. Heavy doors. The kind of place built to keep winter out. That night followed the same rhythm as the others. By around 9 p.m., I'd finished my work for the day. I made a simple dinner, washed the dishes, and lit a fire. Outside, snow drifted lazily down, quiet and steady. Inside, the cabin glowed warm and golden. I remember thinking how rare it felt to be completely unreachable, and how much I liked it. I wasn't scared of the isolation. I welcomed it. By 10:30, I was curled up on the couch with a blanket, scrolling through old photos on my phone, half listening to the wind brush against the trees. Everything felt normal, comforting, predictable. My mind drifted between thoughts of work, plans for the next day, and nothing in particular at all. When the clock hit 11:15, I decided to head to bed. I checked the front door like I always did, deadbolt locked, latch secured. I turned off the lights one by one, letting the darkness settle naturally. The cabin creaked softly as the temperature dropped, the way it did every night. It was familiar by then, reassuring even. The bedroom was cold at first, but I liked that. I slid under the blankets, letting the warmth build slowly. Outside, the forest stood still beneath the snow. No animals. No wind. Just winter doing what winter does. I remember feeling calm. Safe. Tired in the best way. I set my phone on the nightstand face down and glanced at the time one last time. 11:47 p.m. Another ordinary night. Another quiet stretch of sleep waiting for me. My thoughts slowed, drifting toward nothing, and I let my eyes close without a second thought. There was no warning, no bad feeling, no sense of being watched. Just a peaceful winter night in a cabin that felt completely, unquestionably secure. And that's what makes what happened next so hard to explain, because nothing about that night should have gone wrong at all. I don't know what pulled me out of sleep. It wasn't a nightmare. There was no sudden noise, no jolt of fear. It felt more like surfacing slowly from deep water. The kind of waking where your mind drifts up before your body realizes it's time to follow. My eyes opened to darkness. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. The room was exactly as I'd left it. The faint outline of the dresser, the window covered in pale frost, the steady warmth under the blankets. I listened to the quiet hum of my own breathing and waited for sleep to take me back. That's when I noticed what was missing. The wind. Most nights there was always some sound outside. Branches shifting, snow sliding from the trees, even distant movement from animals. But now there was nothing. The silence felt padded, unnatural, like someone had wrapped the cabin in thick insulation. I lay still, listening. A soft sound drifted through the quiet. Not loud enough to startle me, just enough to register. A faint scrape somewhere far off, like ice brushing against wood. I told myself it was the cabin settling. Old buildings make noise, especially in the cold. Then it happened again. Closer this time. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with a vague discomfort I couldn't explain. I shifted under the covers, suddenly aware of how cold the air felt on my face. The heater, which usually clicked on and off through the night, was silent. I glanced at the window. The frost along the edges had thickened, spreading inward in delicate, jagged patterns. I didn't remember it being that cold when I went to sleep. My breath fogged faintly as I exhaled, a thin cloud dissolving into the dark. Another sound. This one wasn't a scrape. It was softer, more deliberate, like snow being compressed under weight. I listened carefully, counting seconds between each noise. There was no pattern, no steady rhythm that would suggest an animal. The sound would pause, linger, then continue again, each time just a little closer to the cabin. My heart began to beat faster. I told myself not to overthink it. Isolation has a way of amplifying ordinary things. When there's nothing else to focus on, your brain fills the gaps. That's what this was, I decided. My imagination working overtime. Still, I didn't move. The feeling crept in slowly, the sensation of being observed. Not intensely, not threateningly. Just present. Like someone standing quietly at the edge of a room, waiting to be noticed. I shifted my head slightly on the pillow. The sound stopped. I froze. Seconds passed. Then more. My muscles stayed tense, every sense stretched thin. I listened so hard my ears ached. The silence pressed in again, heavier than before. Then the sound resumed. This time it wasn't distant. It was directly outside. I sat up slowly, heart pounding now, and swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floor was colder than usual beneath my feet. I stood there, wrapped in my blanket, listening to the faint, careful noise beyond the walls. It didn't feel rushed. Whatever was causing it wasn't panicked or wandering. Felt curious. I took a step toward the door then stopped. The sensation of being watched intensified, like a spotlight snapping on without light. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything new. But I knew deep down that I wasn't as alone as I had been when I fell asleep. And yet, nothing had happened. No banging. No voices. No signs of danger. Just small sounds. Subtle changes. And a growing, unsettling awareness that the quiet of the cabin was no longer empty. It was waiting. I wish I could say the moment of realization came slowly, that I had time to prepare myself for what I was about to see. But fear doesn't arrive politely. It crashes in all at once, heavy and undeniable. I stepped toward the living room window. The closer I got, the colder the air felt, as if the warmth from the fireplace was being pushed back by something unseen. My skin prickled. The pressure in the room changed, subtle but unmistakable, like the cabin had suddenly sunk lower into the earth. I pulled the curtain back just an inch. First I saw nothing but white. Snow reflected the moonlight, smooth and untouched. Relief flickered in my chest, brief, fragile. Then something moved. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just enough to break the illusion. A shape stood near the tree line, darker than the shadows behind it. Tall. Motionless. Too defined to be a tree, too still to be an animal. My breath caught as my eyes adjusted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The shape leaned forward. The atmosphere inside the cabin dropped instantly, like the air had been drained of oxygen. My ears rang. My chest felt tight, each breath shallow and sharp. I became painfully aware of every sound my body made. The rustle of fabric, the thud of my heartbeat. Then it stepped closer. The snow didn't crunch like it should have. Instead, it made a soft, muffled sound, almost careful. That's when I noticed its legs, too long, bending wrong at the joints, moving with an unnatural smoothness that sent a wave of nausea through me. This wasn't a person. My mind scrambled for logic, for any explanation that didn't end with panic. A costume. A trick of the light. But logic shattered when the shape lifted its head. There was a face. Or something shaped like one. Pale against the darkness, stretched too tight. As if it had been pulled over something that didn't belong inside it. The eyes, if they were eyes, reflected the moonlight faintly, fixed directly on the window. On me. The moment our gazes met, the pressure in the cabin intensified. The walls creaked, not from the cold but from strain. The whispering returned all at once, flooding the space, wrapping around my thoughts. I couldn't tell where it was coming from anymore. It was everywhere. Inside my head. The realization hit me with paralyzing force. It knew I was here. It always had. The watching hadn't started tonight. It had only become visible. I stumbled backward, heart slamming against my ribs, my legs barely responding. The shape outside tilted its head, mimicking the movement with unsettling precision. That small gesture broke something in me. This wasn't coincidence. This was attention. A knock echoed through the cabin, deep and hollow. Not from the door. From the wall beside the window. The sound vibrated through my bones, slow and deliberate, like a signal. My body screamed at me to run, to hide, to do something. The cabin no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a trap. The whispering sharpened, forming fragments of sound that almost resembled words. My name brushed the edge of my hearing, stretched thin, distorted. That was when fear became urgency. Because whatever stood outside wasn't just passing through. It wasn't curious anymore. It had chosen me. And it was coming closer. I didn't think. I reacted. The knock hit the wall again, harder this time, and the cabin shuddered. Snow shook loose from the roof in a dull avalanche. That sound snapped whatever paralysis had hold of me. I ran. Bare feet slapped against the frozen floor as I bolted toward the bedroom, my breath coming out in sharp, panicked bursts. Behind me, the whispering surged, no longer quiet or distant. It poured through the cabin like wine through broken glass, overlapping voices rising and falling in frantic, hungry rhythms. The front door handle rattled. Violently. I skidded into the bedroom and slammed the door shut just as something heavy struck the cabin wall. The impact knocked a picture frame to the floor in the living room. Glass shattered. I screamed without meaning to and threw my weight against the dresser, shoving it in front of the door. The knocking moved. Not followed. Moved. From the door to the walls to the window. The glass rattled inches from my head. Frost spread rapidly across it, crawling inward like living veins. The temperature dropped so fast my teeth started chattering. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone when I tried calling for help again. No signal. A loud crack echoed outside. Wood groaned. Something scraped along the exterior of the cabin, slow and deliberate, circling. Just like before, but closer now. The whispers sharpened, turning frantic, overlapping with breathy exhales that sounded far too close. Then the bedroom door buckled. Just slightly. Enough to make my heart slam into my throat. I backed into the corner, clutching the phone to my chest, every nerve on fire. The door creaked inward another inch. I could see darkness through the gap, too dark, swallowing the weak light from the room. A hand slid into view. Long, pale. The fingers bent wrong, joints flexing in ways that made my stomach twist. They pressed against the wood, testing it, feeling for weakness. I lunged for the window. The glass was iced over, but I slammed my elbow into it once, twice, again. Pain exploded up my arm, but on the third strike the window cracked open, cold air blasting in like a scream. The whispers spiked. The hand withdrew. The door slammed forward with sudden force, knocking the dresser aside. I didn't wait to see what came through. I hurled myself out the window, crashing into deep snow below. The cold hit like knives, stealing my breath, but adrenaline kept me moving. I ran. Branches tore at my clothes, my skin, my face. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The forest felt wrong, too quiet, too still. As if everything was holding its breath with me. Something moved behind me. Fast. I could hear it now, no longer careful. Snow exploded under its weight. I stumbled, fell, rolled, scrambling back to my feet just as something passed where my head had been seconds before. I screamed again and ran harder, lungs burning, legs screaming. A dim light flickered ahead, the road. I burst out of the trees and collapsed onto the frozen ground, gasping, sobbing, waiting for impact. It never came. The forest went silent again. When I dared to look back, the trees stood still, dark and empty, as if nothing had ever been there at all. I lay there shaking, staring at the sky, knowing, deep in my bones, that if I'd been even a second slower, I wouldn't have made it out. And that whatever chased me had stopped. Not because it couldn't follow, but because it didn't need to. I don't remember how long I lay there by the roadside. Time stopped behaving normally after that. My body shook uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from the crash of adrenaline finally wearing off. My lungs burned. My hands were numb. Snow clung to my clothes and melted against my skin, soaking me through. Eventually, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness. A truck slowed, then stopped. I don't remember what I said to the driver. Only that my voice didn't sound like it belonged to me. Shaking. Broken. He wrapped me in a blanket and drove me into town without asking too many questions. I think he could tell that whatever I'd seen wasn't something words could handle. The sheriff met us at the station. By the time we drove back to the cabin, dawn was already bleeding into the sky, turning the snow pale blue. Everything looked smaller in daylight. Less threatening. Ordinary even. The kind of place people rent to relax. The cabin door was still closed. Locked. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. Inside, nothing was out of place, except for the picture frame on the floor. The dresser stood exactly where it always had. The bedroom door showed no damage. No scratches. No cracks. They asked me where the thing came in. I didn't have an answer. They checked the snow around the cabin. There were no footprints leading away. No tracks circling the building. No marks near the windows or walls. Just untouched snow. Pristine. They suggested shock. Sleepwalking. Stress. Hallucination brought on by isolation and cold. One of them even laughed softly and said winter can mess with people's heads. I didn't argue. I just wanted to leave. I packed my things under supervision, moving mechanically, afraid to be alone even for a moment. Every shadow felt too deep. Every sound made my chest tighten. The forest stood silent around us, tall and indifferent. Nothing moved. Before I closed my suitcase, I noticed something strange. Snow. A thin dusting of it inside the bag. That didn't make sense. My clothes were damp, yes, but this was fresh. Powdery. Untouched. I brushed it away, my hands shaking, and told myself I was imagining it. I drove straight home. Didn't stop. Didn't look back. For a while, life returned to something resembling normal. I took time off work. I slept with the lights on. Winter passed. Spring came. The world moved on. But some nights when everything is quiet enough, I notice things. How the air in my room sometimes feels heavier for no reason. How silence can arrive too suddenly. How I wake up at the same exact time every night. 2:14 a.m. Last week, I woke up to find condensation on the inside of my bedroom window, despite the heat being on. And pressed lightly into the fogged glass was a single handprint. Long fingers. Wrong joints. Facing inward. I wiped it away immediately. The glass was ice cold beneath my palm. When I stepped back, the room looked normal again. Safe. Familiar. But as I climbed back into bed, heart pounding, I noticed something beneath the window. Footprints. Bare. Human-shaped. Leading away from my bed. Toward the door. And stopping just before it.